All right, we're going to start up, if you have your review sheets with you, your Chapter 7 test reviews. I'm going to go over those right now. Remember, the test will be first thing tomorrow morning. I'm also going to email you something tonight. What I'm doing is I have gone out to Bootstrap and basically kind of did what I showed you before. In other words, I downloaded Bootstrap, and then just all I have in there under the JS folder is the bootstrap.min.js. All I have in there under the CSS folder is the bootstrap.min.css. I've got the 4 files under the glyphicon or fonts folder, and I've added just that template. So we're going to build something tomorrow as a class. But if you would have that open by 9 o'clock, then we'll start on that, and that should give us time. Whatever we don't finish tomorrow, maybe we'll work on it Friday. We'll see. So question number 1 was, how do you define a fragment identifier at the top of the page? Remember, it's div ID equals, and then whatever the name is that you give it. All right, since it's ID equals, all right, there can only be 1 per page, right? Any questions on that one? Hopefully that made sense. Now, when you want to use it, or use one like it, number 2 was, how do you use a name? How do you link to a name fragment called work experience on a page called My Resume? Well, remember, it's an href, then it's the name of the page. So myresume.html #, because work experience is a named fragment. All right. So work experience, and then whatever heading that you give it. So that will allow you to basically go to that part of the page. All right, remember what a named identifier is. It allows you to go to another part of the same web page. All right, just kind of skip your way around, whatever you want to say. Some people find red irritating, but I figured it would at least stand out. And it matched Drew's hoodie, so what can we say? So, questions on that one? Again, this would be whatever, but this is called work experience, so it made sense to call it work experience for the hyperlink too. At least I thought it did. Number 3, remember that target equal blank causes a new page to open in its own browser window. If you don't do that, it opens in the same window where your web page currently is. And it's considered, as I told you the other day, bad netiquette, which is internet etiquette. It's bad netiquette, especially if you're going to go to somebody else's site. You should never open somebody else's web page inside of your site, because that gives them the mistaken impression that that's part of your site when it's not. Any questions on that one? All right, number 4. When do you use a fully qualified? What is a fully qualified URL? What does a fully qualified URL start with? http://. So for instance, and I showed you that the other day when I just linked to Rankin's page, and I had to put in there href equals, and then in the double quotes, http://www.rankin.edu. All right. So if you're going to an external site like that, all right, that's when you use a fully qualified URL. I mean, you always can, but if I'm going to someplace on my own page, on my own site, it doesn't make sense to use a fully qualified URL. That's why with yours, when you took the test and stuff, you were just saying href equals index.html, href equals about.html, etc. All right, that's relative. Number 5, what is a sprite? Why should you use sprites? Well, there's several reasons for using sprites, But remember the sprite, remember the example that you had on your homework? It had the little pictures of whatever the heck that was on the bistro, Tower of Pisa or whatever the heck it was. I don't know. But one thing that a sprite does is it is a file that contains multiple graphic images. So what that does is it decreases the number of calls. Remember, HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocols. So it decreases the number of calls or requests to the server. Better word for calls right there would have really been requests, but it's the same thing. Any questions on that one? So you know what a sprite is, and you know that that's an advantage of using a sprite. There are other advantages also, but that's one of the main advantages. All right, everybody's caught up? Good. All right, number 6. How do you create a link to a CSS file named print.css? And right there, that's the answer. I put a little note underneath it, but the answer is up there in gray and red. So it's link rel equals style sheet href equals print.css. Remember, if it's a print.css, the media typically would be set equal to print. Now, while you're writing this, I put remember why what in print CSS. Just remember a few of the things that we talked about. For instance, if you're in print, if you're going to make a print CSS file, you might want to remove all color from your site. You might only want to print black and white so you're not wasting toner. All right? You might decide that there's no reason to have hyperlinks in there with the underline by them, etc. You may decide you want to remove all images. We've talked about all this stuff yesterday, and the advantages of doing this they were also in your book on Chapter 7 when they talked about a print CSS file. Any questions on print CSS? The key part is this: media equal print. All right? That distinguishes or says that it's going to be something just for when you're printing things out. All right, number 7. What is the viewport tag? There's quite a few questions in here that relate to the viewport tag. So what is it used for? Okay, there's the answer, and that's the answer out of the book. But by and large, the reason you use viewport is so that your page will scale on any kind of device. Remember hearing that earlier today? All right, but this is the official thing that they put in the book. It allows you to set the width and also the scale of your viewport. Your viewport is what you're using to view the website. The viewport we're currently using right now, right here, all right, that viewport is a laptop. If I'm going on it from my phone, then the viewport is a cell phone. So again, that's the official one, and typically when she puts questions in there, she takes them out of her own verbiage. So even though I gave you my own shtick on it, that's pretty much, I think, the way that they ask it on the test. Questions? All right, number 8. What is a media query? And inside of the media query, because one of the questions in there is what is the only attribute of the media query? So a media query determines the capabilities of the browser that is running. In other words, what your resolution is going to be, what your orientation is going to be. Remember, we created 2 media queries today. That's one of the reasons I've been going through that path of light. So you know what media queries are. There's something in, they're inside of the media tag, then there's curly braces, and then there's all of the CSS that you want to run for that particular thing. If you use the only tag, that means only use this on browsers that recognize the tag. So if you're running an old version of IE, it would just ignore it. Does that make sense? Because there is a question on there about the only tag, and we really didn't go through that in class. Questions on any of the first 8? Everybody caught up? A couple people are still writing, so. Again, I've said this before, but maybe one of you missed that day. I don't know. Remember, at the beginning of the semester, one of the things we talked about is the way that these courses work grade-wise. 75% is on your tests, 20% is on the homeworks, and 5% is going to be on something we're going to do later on in the semester. The reason I'm telling you that, even though those homeworks that you just did for Chapter 6 for the CSS positioning, all right, it said on there they were worth 100 points. It's really that they're worth 20% of that once we scale it. And also, just so you know, because quite a few, well, not quite a few, but probably 3 or 4 of you didn't do anything for the Bootstrap one. So what I did was I made the first 2 homeworks each worth 100 points, and the one on Bootstrap I only made it worth 10 points. So if you didn't do it, you lost 10 points, but you only lost 10 points rather than 100. All right. There's the simplest question that's on there. You saw this today. Remember when we did not want the images to display when we used our media query for mobile? We said display : none. So display : none causes an object to not display. It makes it invisible. Whatever you want to say about it. All right? But there is a question about that on the test. Number 10, what are some recommendations for mobile web design? We talked about this before, that if this is your viewport, right here, so let's say that is a cell phone, you want a single column. That's one thing, all right? Also, percentages or M's, so you want to use things that are relative, not fixed. Right? We talked about things like this before, that if we say that the size of it is 960 pixels, all right, that's not going to that's not going to scale well on a mobile device. Number 11. We didn't talk much about these elements, but they hopefully from their names they make sense. If you use the before pseudo element, it allows you to generate something before, let's see. I wonder if I did these backwards. Hold on, because I sure don't want to give you wrong answers, but it looks wrong to me. Just write this down because it's page 324 in your book. All right. After generates content after the selector, before, and I think I wrote that backwards. How about we'll say this? But again, page 324 in your book. If you take a look at what's in your book on page 324, you should be all right. Sorry, I did not mean to screw you up there. All right, got to kick it into gear a little bit because we're supposed to end in 3 minutes. The content property, that was, I believe, right in there in the same place, also on page 324. It generates content to a web page document. So again, page 324. So if you're going to look at one page while you're studying the test, I guess that's the page to look at. I always try to remember before we start class to ask if there's any questions, but if you, please, if you do have any before we take the test, all right, please ask. All right, number 13. Responsible website design consists of 3 things. These are the 3. Fluid layout. Fluid means that as it expands or contracts, it scales. Flexible images, we talked about setting the image width to 100%. And media queries. You already know what those are. So those are the 3 components. Fluid layout, flexible images, media queries. Number 14. This is kind of big, but the point is, just take a look at the section at the end of the chapter because there's a question or 2 on Flexbox. And that's on pages 344 and 345. Remember, Flexbox is an alternative to using float left and float right. You did an exercise where you worked with Flexboxes. All right? Everyone who's turned in their homework, unless you did it in the last 5 or 10 minutes, they've all been graded already. They're all back out there. All right? 2 or 3 of you have not turned it in. It's supposed to be in by the end of the period. Please try to get it in as soon as possible. All right? Number 15. What's the difference between the picture element and the source set attribute? It's confusing. That exercise you might have found to be confusing. Let's just put it this way. You should know what both of them mean. So if that means that you've got to go back and look in the chapter, they talked about responsive images. So the source set is on page 340. Put in here page 340. And the picture element is on 338. All right. 2 more. What is OneWeb? Providing, in other words, some people when they talk about OneWeb, they call that mobile first. It's the idea of setting any website so that it'll work on any display. All right? Any website will resonate correctly on any type of display. And finally, the last question, number 17. The phone attribute. Here's a question for you. Think about it before you answer, but somebody please try to answer this. Does the phone attribute actually make a phone call on your website? Does it actually make a phone call? No. It provides that link in there that if you click it, will allow you to make a phone call. You're still making it. It cannot do it by itself. It needs an action from the user in order to be able to actually make a phone call. So remember that. Hint, hint. All right? Any questions? Any of them that you need to see again or need to see repeated or whatever? All right, so again, when you come in here, the first thing that we'll do is we'll take the test from 8 till 9, 9 till about 10:30. We'll do a bootstrap exercise. All right? All right, that's all that I've got.